Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Airsick Hydra, and on this video we're going to be doing a little bit of a reflection and critique of the Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 beta, which we have just completed. It ended only but yesterday, and boy am I a little bit sore to see it go for now, but rest assured, supposedly we'll be coming back again for one more beta before the game launches in January. But what I want to do is have a decent discussion about this skirmish mode, about the multiplayer within the game. I'm not going to touch on the single player within this video. Reason being is we only have access to really the prologue and tutorial right now. The actual single player components are still missing from the game, the main campaign, so I really don't think it's fair for really a detailed discussion to be had. But there were numerous questions about this game that I had when I went in, and I feel, having put about 60 hours into the game in the space of a week, yes, I played it that much, I feel in a better position to discuss this. The first thing I would like to say is, although we could be talking about graphics and audio and all that stuff, what's really important about an RTS is the gameplay. And the first question about the 12 factions is, are they unique? Because any game sporting 12 factions, you're going to be asking yourself, okay, is this a minor alteration between the factions? Is one unit slightly different? Or is this genuinely a different experience for each? And what I can say as a beginner to the Battlefleet Gothic series is each of the actual factions has had its own learning curve for me. This would probably be reduced if you've already played the previous game to some degree, as you might be familiar with some of the concepts as to which forces will have more broadsides, meaning sort of lateral shooting weapons, which ones will be shooting forwards a bit more, which ones will be fast, which will be slow, and which abilities may come with what. This may be something you'll pick up a little bit quicker, but for me personally, I found each faction's unique mechanics for the most part to involve a little bit of a learning curve. Now, there are exceptions to this, and there are certainly factions that require some balancing. The Space Marines, the Astartes for example, are exceptionally weak. The Dark Elder are, let's say, not being enjoyed by quite a few to play against, at least, because their hit and run while being stealthed mechanic can be pretty tough. But thus far I can say safely that some of the factions have totally different playstyles and strengths and weaknesses, and this is something that I'm actually very pleased to see, and changing from one faction to another there is quite a bit to learn. A large portion of this comes from actually learning simply the ships, and this is where one of the first difficulty steps of the game really comes in. Obviously this is probably a factor and maybe even more complex in the previous game, but when you're looking through ships you have to weigh up not only their movement speed, to their armor values, to their weapons, to the range of the weapons, to the sort of optimum efficiency for, or how accurate a weapon will be at certain ranges. Quite a lot of information to absorb, and really this is one of those situations where you should just sit down and read. You can do trial and error, which is my personal preference. It will take you a lot longer to learn, but it needs to be done because the fleets are fairly complex. Now you can go for just a standard pre-built fleet. These ones are usable, but the game's balancing really goes around the concept of, or lends itself to the concept of, having a lot of the same in a fleet. We'll come back to that in a little while, but really a lot of the metas and a lot of players have preferred that playstyle, which I do think is a bit of a shame. But thus far the fleets, the overall playstyles, there's certainly some variety, although let's say, hats off again, balance is needed for some, because some are very much weaker than others, and others simply have a high learning curve. So I think it's going to be a bit of time before, say, the arguments about whether Necrons are OP or UP, that's probably going to take a few months to really get to the bottom of, because some players are having such an easy time beating them, others are having a very difficult time. And this really represents the difficulty of analysing the balance of this game, because the differences players have are so different. They're just polar opposites in many cases, and in many cases it is due to this fairly steep learning curve, not only in what the ships are, what they do, how to min-max a fleet, but simply just how to play. Not only in terms of just how to position and move, but the game's actual gameplay is fairly tough to pick up. It's a little bit more micro-intensive than I anticipated. If you were used to a traditional RTS of sorts, where you just simply have a unit and click for it to go X to go Y, to move away, to kite, and then to shoot again, you're in for a little bit of a surprise. You are going to have 3 to 4 different stances for that unit. You're going to need to change them depending on the situation. You're not going to be able to just leave it in one stance the whole time unless you want to be suboptimal. You're going to have a couple of different boarding opportunities, maybe different missiles to fire. You could maybe have different craft that you could fire too. You're going to have about 15 buttons on the bottom of your screen for each individual ship, and this can be quite overwhelming at first. The previous game, I am aware, had an autocast feature, which I think in some cases I can see the arguments as to why people miss it, because it therefore makes the game a lot more micro-intensive within this, although supposedly the amount of abilities have also been reduced. Still, though, it is quite a mouthful to try and take. This is, for a player that's not particularly used to an RTS game, quite a lot to manage in a short space of time, especially if you want to be going for the, again, skirmish PvP mode. Within campaign, you can slow time, you can pause, you can queue up all of those instructions that you want to do, and obviously the stress will therefore be far lower. But this isn't necessarily a particularly easy game to pick up and to play effectively. Again, I think this is going to maybe work against the game a little bit in terms of general balance and sort of attitude toward the game, because it's very easy to lose to someone a few times in a row who has simply just mastered a lot of these aspects of the game. And quite often when you get stomped in this game, because there's such a learning curve, you really do get stomped. You really do get stomped. I've beaten people without even losing a ship. I've beaten people, I think, just by stealthing around and capturing points because they went for a slow army. And that brings us very neatly to the game type, and this really needs a little bit of a conversation, because now it's a semi-objective based game. And when first starting this beta, I was saying to myself, I don't think the objective is that relevant or useful or even important, and boy, has my view changed. Simply adapting your playstyle to an enemy based on what they have and what you have is so important in terms of map control and points, because if you have an advantage in terms of speed and not too much of a disadvantage in range, you can just capture points and force the enemy to split up. You can actually force them to split to a degree and then take advantage of this. And map control is a very big variable now, and this is something that I think some people will not be happy about. Now, this is an optional mode. I say optional, it's the standard mode, that there are these points you control which generate, well, points, and these add up to a total. You also get points for killing ships, that has to be said, and you get quite a lot. So if you annihilate an enemy fleet, even if you don't annihilate them completely, down to one left, you still get a lot of points for doing the kills, but you may still lose if you sacrifice all map control. Personally, I'm happy with this. I like this because it makes room for different strategies, and it also punishes some of the more cheeseball strategies. Those people that just want to build the most combat efficient fleet, let's say a bunch of just really heavy, slow-moving orc rocks, you're not going to win. You're not going to win because someone can just run circles around you. They can capture things around the map and you're just going to be outrun. You might be able to use them effectively in some situations and sort of force the enemy in certain bottlenecks, but it's going to be tough to do. And again, this, a bit like the balance, is going to be one of those situations where it does have potential to drive players away, because it is frustrating when you build a fleet that you think, oh man, I really want to have just 3 Emperor class ships for my Imperial fleet. Well, good news. They're really slow and someone's going to have an absolute field day running around you in circles. So again, the game has its limitations there. Now, there's also the big conversation that has to be had regarding the skill choices. We get 2 skills for our Admiral ship, and you get 2 as well for your fleet. And some of these skills will apply of the fleet skills to certain units, others will apply to all units. Now, these skills and abilities in some factions feel like they're fairly game impacting. They feel like they'll have a pretty big influence on your play style with a faction. Others, not so much, and some factions seem to just simply lack anything particularly interesting, or just give some minor bonuses to range and things like that, which is significant in terms of gameplay. Don't get me wrong, some of them have a pretty big impact, but just aren't particularly exciting. And this, I think, detracts a little bit from the available playstyles for each of the races. Coming back to those 12 for a moment, each of them is somewhat unique, but some of them are far more tunnelled in terms of their available choice as to what they can do. Now, this is obviously probably something to do with canon as well. Obviously, you can't have a very tanky Dark Elder fleet. It makes no sense. Dark Elder do what Dark Elder do. Games Workshop have said what they do, and it's up to these developers to create a game that sort of manifests that. But at the same time, some of the fleets, it feels like, well, actually maybe I want to go for a really close range version of this fleet, and it might make sense in your head, but you might not have the ships available to you to actually do it, or skills to really make it effective. It's not a problem, but if you do find yourself wanting to, say, have a long-range artillery-based fleet, and you don't like Chaos, well, tough. Chaos are quite good for that. If you love Tau, and fortunately they're fairly flexible, so if you don't like broadsides, you have the option of changing for a fleet that'll be more frontal. Not all of them, though, have this flexibility, and there is certainly I think that's more of a limitation of the IP, though. Simply, there is opportunity within some of the factions to adapt to different play styles, but some of them really are just a little bit samey, but not such a bad thing. In terms of replay value, the replay value in this game really is and only comes from the ability to beat other people and to master the craft of the gameplay. We already know from the previous game they've removed the customization that was here, so this was the ability to add bits and bobs to ships to level up various components and such. Obviously I didn't play the previous game, but I have watched a few people play it for a few hours. I did watch streams of it for quite some time. This is gone from the multiplayer aspect, and this is a big conversation to have, obviously, because when I say the multiplayer aspect, I mean the skirmish mode. The skirmish mode does not have this anymore. We have been told the single player still does. We're going to save that for the next video, but this is obviously something that's raised a few eyebrows, because it's, on one hand, a feature that was enjoyed by many of the PvEers, or so it would seem. And at the same time, completely the opposite view is held by those who simply wanted to PvP. And as a PvPer myself, and I want to be transparent with why I hold this view, I am happy to not have to level up anything to be able to instantly change to anything else on the fly without having to invest time to unlock things. Although, granted, you do actually have to play a few games to unlock all the skills, which is a bit of a weird choice. But anyway, they've opted to do that, maybe as a sort of an introduction to a chapter as such. But once you've done so, you can literally play any of the available skills. This is okay. It offers some flexibility and customization, but it's not the same as a progression-based system. So on one hand, you've got PvPers now that are quite happy that it's more ergonomic and streamlined in terms of people being able to engage with each other and play versus each other, mix and max strategies and change on the fly very fluidly. And that it achieves that very, very well, I think. But at the same time, it has obviously sacrificed something pretty big. We have been told it's still there in single player. I'm just saying that one more time, but we haven't seen it yet. So that's something that we need to revisit and have a chat about. Obviously, the worry, and I think it's going to be a big worry for many people, is that there's only 3 factions that actually participate in a single player campaign. The problem of that is there's 12 factions, and you might not like those 3, and the campaign might not have like the same level of satisfaction as the previous games. Let's say Fleet Management Simulator, which is kind of the best way I can come up to describe it. But in summary, putting all that to one side, that big potential drawback for some people, the beta seems to have been fairly successful in terms of appeal. There seems to be plenty of people talking about it, playing it, enjoying the gameplay, participating in it. A little bit of frustration here and there. And I wouldn't be surprised if this manifests in the reviews. I don't want to anchor it to a specific number. I think that would be unfair of me to give one, but I think there will be a percentage of views that are going to come from either frustrated people from the learning curve, from the sheer knowledge curve that comes from it. I know those two are the same thing, but also from the actual the gameplay learning curve as well. There's not only knowledge, but there's also execution that are required for this, which both add up to meaning there's a fair bit of time is going to be needed. So alongside all of that, you've also then got the people that just simply don't like PvP and feel that the game has less to offer for them. So I'm very curious to see what the numbers look like. But overall, if you want my impression of the game, I think it's doing what it set out to do, which is thus far to have a more multiplayer-centric PvP or skirmish mode. I think it's done that pretty well. I haven't enjoyed an RTS PvP this much in a long time. I really like it, I really do. But we shall have to wait and see what the wider audience thinks. Guys, hope you've enjoyed the little rant and waffle, just really an overview as to what's been happening, and what I think about what's been happening, and we will keep a very close eye on this game. Lots of content to come on it. I will be working on improving. I know I'm a bit of a scrub still, but we will get there with a little bit of time. Guys, take care, have yourself a great week.